The $1 billion welfare fraud scandal in Minnesota was enabled by DEI. Let me explain. Between 2020 and now, federal prosecutors say that more than $1 billion was stolen from Minnesota's social service programs and funneled to fraudulent nonprofits like Feeding Our Future. These organizations claim services for tens of thousands of children who didn't exist. Instead, taxpayer dollars went to funding luxury houses, high-end cars, jewelry, overseas real estate projects, and worst of all, Al-Shabaab, an Islamist terrorist group in Somalia. Now, new reporting shows that the Minnesota Department of Education officials noticed red flags early. They questioned invoices that made no mathematical sense. They noticed new feeding centers were registered in strip malls that were basically empty. They saw providers claiming to serve more meals than there were children living in entire zip codes. And every time they tried to investigate, they were hit with the same accusation. If you expose this, it's racist. That's because Feeding Our Future was run by American citizens of Somali heritage. When the state began scrutinizing their applications, the organization filed a discrimination complaint with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights and later sued the Department of Education, accusing it of racial bias and discrimination. Feeding Our Future weaponized DEI by telling the Minnesota Department of Education that failing to promptly approve new applicants from minority-owned businesses would result in a lawsuit featuring accusations of racism that would be sprawled across the news.
Speaking of the Somali community, President Trump is targeting them and your state. In part, he's citing fraud as the reason for his crackdown. Dozens of people of East African descent have been charged, convicted, and sentenced for stealing more than $1 billion in taxpayer money from government programs during COVID. As you know, Governor, that is more than Minnesota spends each year to run its Department of Corrections. So I want to give you a chance to respond to this. Do you take responsibility for failing to stop this fraud in your state?
Well, certainly I take responsibility for putting people in jail. Governors don't get to just talk theoretically. We have to solve problems. And I will note, it's not just Somalis. Minnesota is a generous state. Minnesota is a prosperous state, a well-run state. We're AAA bond rated, but that attracts criminals. Those people are going to jail. We're doing everything we can. But to demonize an entire community on the actions of a few, it's lazy. And as you heard Senator Kelly say, this president has cut a lot of inspector generals. He's cut programs that could help us tackle this on. So we'll take it on. We'll put folks in jail. I don't care what your nationality is. I don't care what your religion is, your color. If you're committing crimes, these are programs that were meant to serve students with autism, to housing, and to making sure people had enough to eat. There's a reason Minnesota ranks as the top, lowest childhood poverty, best place for children to live. People are taking advantage of that. They're going to prison. That is totally disconnected with demonizing an entire group of people who came here fleeing civil war and created a vibrant community that makes Minnesota and this country better. But that's Donald Trump. Deflect, demonize, come up with no solutions. He's not going to help fix anything on fraud. My God, there's a big difference between fraud and corruption is something he knows about.
Well,
Nicole, talk about deflection. He runs to, I will note it's not just Somalis.
Listen, KJ, this is what we call a pivot gone awry. He pivoted so much, he just kind of pirouetted around the question that he was asked. And he often does that. It's his own version of the word salad, right? It's a little bit more, coherent than your typical word salad, but he still did not answer the question. And the smart reporter would have asked him, sir, that's very interesting. Will you now answer my question? That should have been her follow-up. But of course, we know she's not going to pump him for an answer. Tim Walz is full of shit. We knew that when he was running for vice president. We knew it when he stood there and lied and said that he was in China when he was not in China. All the things that Tim Walz has done. He's taken his eyes off the prize for his own state. This is not one or two people committing fraud. This is a systemic kind of fraud. And as much as Democrats like to use that word systemic, here's their opportunity. This is systemic fraud. And he turned a blind eye. And when people complained to him and when people said, here's the fraud, we've laid it out for you, they were intimidated, threatened, and all the things that you're not supposed to do to whistleblowers. So this is something that the president should look into. This is something that the DOJ should look into. And the president has the right to say that these people can't stay. You can't defraud us and stay. You can't rob us and stay. You may not. You may not. I will be so happy when this man goes into the trash can of history. The quicker he gets into the trash can of history, there are just some people who have done irreparable harm to this nation, and he is one of them. Absolutely shameful.
Yeah. I mean, Shelley, you heard what he said. And this is another incident caused by the COVID scamdemic. You've been talking about this for quite some time. These nonprofits, these programs, these things that the government have put money in, throw all this money into, and it's frauded.
Is absolutely right for fraud. And as we can see, the fraud doesn't seem to stop at all. No one, all they want to do, they get this money, they create, again, the government creates all of these programs, NGOs funnels the money down, and voila, there's somehow a need that's created to meet those funds, right? But the funds really don't get to where they're supposed to go to, number one. Number two, the programs are largely on fraudulent creations. And then number three, they're mostly top heavy, meaning that the administrators, so-called, and the directors, they're the ones who get about 70, 80, even 90% of the funds that they can then launder however they want to. These programs use taxpayer money. Any program, I don't care if you're a nonprofit, if you use taxpayer subsidies, then technically you owe an accounting to the public. If you don't want to do that, don't take public money at all. At all, no tax subsidies, nothing, just like churches, but that's a different story. Then don't take the money. These are taxpayer monies. Tim Walz and his ilk, they all need to be in jail. They need to give the money back. And then not only that, last thing, this is the most insidious part, I think, maybe. The people who actually need whatever these programs are offering, they almost always, if not always, they wind up worse than they started. They wind up on the negative, if you will, the negative end, below the negative, if there's such a thing. They wind up worse off while these jokers they keep going. They go to the next program, the next taxpayer pot of money. This is why I say smaller government. All of these ABC institutions, bureaus, but they need to be shut down too. Give us our money back.
Yeah, Tyrone, and the federal heat is coming, okay? The U.S. Treasury and House Republicans just launched investigations into Walz's handling of $1 billion in food aid fraud. So what do you think is going to come of this, if anything, and do you think this is the right move?
Well, our government every day proves more and more that it is a continuing criminal enterprise, by and large. I mean, you've got U.S. senators who are crying about the due process of dope peddlers, and suggesting that, they called it the war on drugs for decades, right? Now, when you start blowing shit up, it's a problem, all right? I think that the DOJ needs to open an investigation into the death of Melissa Hortman. She was a House member up in Minnesota. And she was assassinated by John Voltaire. This happened back in June. Her assassination came shortly after she proposed a bill that would have required citizenship documentation and requirements for you to receive Medicaid in that state. Okay. So it's looking more and more like her agenda would have blown the lid off of what we now know is true. How much did Tim Walz profit from this? Some people really need to go to prison. And remember, Voltaire said that he received orders from Walz to assassinate, what's her name up there? She's the senator. He's the U.S. senator from Minnesota. Was it Klobuchar?
Yeah.
So if people are going to say, oh, he was just talking out of his head, was he? Yeah. That needs to be investigated, because was this woman assassinated on the orders of a sitting governor, like the assassin alleges was the intent for the U.S. senator? Did this happen because she was getting in the way of a lot of money?
Yeah. Great points here. And Nicole, my question is, I haven't heard the messaging from Republicans how Tim Walz and these Somalis were defrauding poor people. They're taking money from them, and these people are the very same people that are more likely than not, they vote Democrat. So where's the messaging there? Because that's what I think needs to really get out. Because here you saw him on Meet the Press. His biggest issue is don't demonize Somalis. Not you got a huge fraud issue in your state that is taking money and food from poor people that need it.
Well, listen, there are a lot of things happening very quickly. I can honestly say that I am duly impressed with what the GOP is currently doing and what they're going to be doing for the next 3 weeks. They have 3 more weeks in session before the end of the holiday season, beginning of holiday season. You know, they're gearing up for a fight, and this fight is over American healthcare. And this is going to be a fight. It's not going to be nice. It's not going to be pleasant. It's going to be literally taking candy from babies. So gearing up for that and gearing up for the midterms. This thing with Tim Walz and this Somali fraud, the DOJ is going to take care of. It is easily proven. We're starting to see some of the whistleblowers leak information on X of all platforms. You know, they've got phone logs. They've got emails they sent that went unreturned, threats, some veiled and some not, that happened. So this story is unfolding. It doesn't need any help. It's unwrapping itself. But these next 3 weeks and maybe the first 2 weeks of session when they're back in January are going to be very interesting because, again, remember, they did not resolve the issue. They have a continuing resolution. So at the end of January, it's a very good likelihood that we will shut the government down again because they cannot come to an agreement. Now, they've kicked the same can for about 8 years. And this is what happens when you procrastinate. Things come home to roost. Now they're up against the wall. They have to make some decisions. $600,000 a year and you're getting Obamacare subsidies, there's a problem. But here's what I know about people who make $600,000 a year getting Obamacare subsidies. They're not giving it back without a fight. They're not. So we've got a lot of things going on, a lot of things brewing. So there's some very interesting ideas being kicked around on Capitol Hill that I'm interested to see come to fruition. As a healthcare executive, especially price transparency. My practice is we got our prices on the wall. Ain't no second guessing us. There's no surprises. We talk to you, you sign off on it. We have a good agreement. Some practices do not run that way, as we all know. You get a surprise bill and they'll say, oh no, we told you it was going to cost you $700. Whatever. So there are a lot of things coming that they're working on, and much more important than unwrapping Tim Walz. His own people are going to take Caesar down, and I cannot wait for it. It's going to be juicy.